Gerald and Jessie, a couple in the midst of packing, prepare for their upcoming trip. As they embark on their journey, Gerald attempts to lighten the mood with playful banter, but Jessie remains distant, rebuffing his advances. Sensing the underlying tension, Gerald reassures her, suggesting that this getaway will be beneficial for their strained marriage. Along the way, they pass a stray dog gnawing on a carcass by the roadside. They take little notice of it, continuing their drive in silence. Upon arriving at a secluded lake house for their romantic getaway, Gerald and Jessie settle in. The fridge is fully stocked with food, prepared for the entire weekend ahead. Jessie, sensing an opportunity to interact with the dog they had seen earlier, takes a piece of raw meat outside and calls for it. Inside, Gerald discreetly takes a Viagra pill, preparing himself for the evening. Meanwhile, the dog arrives, and Jessie offers it the meat. However, as Gerald steps outside, his presence startles the dog, causing it to flee. Inside, Jessie changes into a slip, but Gerald unexpectedly handcuffs her to the bed and begins enacting a stranger fantasy. Jessie grows uncomfortable, leading to a heated argument. Gerald accuses her of not trying, while Jessie points out his lack of interest, and he claims she can't blame him for his inability to get aroused. Jessie asks Gerald to uncuff her, but he refuses. He suddenly suffers a heart attack and collapses on top of her. She struggles to push him off and tries to break free from the handcuffs, all while seeing blood pool around Gerald's body. Hours later, she remains handcuffed to the bed. A crackling sound from outside catches her attention. Jessie hears the gate open and yells for help. The dog enters the room, and she tries to scare it away. Instead, the dog licks Gerald's arm, then begins to tear into his flesh. As Jessie watches in horror, she sees Gerald appear to wake up and speak, but when she looks again, his body remains lifeless on the floor. She realizes she is hallucinating. The imaginary Gerald forces Jessie to acknowledge that Gerald is truly dead, a fact she recognized just minutes after his body hit the floor. He tells her she must free herself from the cuffs if she wants to survive, emphasizing that she spent 5 hours screaming for help to no avail. The truth hits her: nobody hurt her because Gerald had given everyone around the lake the weekend off. Jessie envisions herself breaking free from the cuffs, but is interrupted by a hallucination of another version of herself, imaginary Jessie, who warns her not to trust the voice of imaginary Gerald. Imaginary Jessie forces Jessie to confront a painful childhood memory from when she was 12. As Jessie reaches for her phone, imaginary Gerald reminds her that the phone is about to die because he failed to charge it. Imaginary Jessie urges Jessie to stay alive long enough for someone to find her, reminding her that if she can't escape, survival is her only option. Jessie, in a moment of reflection, tells imaginary Gerald that she desperately wanted to please him when he began taking pills for his erectile dysfunction. Although Gerald hid the prescription from her, she discovered it but never confronted him. She recalls a time when Gerald tried to be intimate without the pill. Jessie remembers how Gerald couldn't get aroused without holding her wrists above her head, a moment that triggered her first doubts about the man she had married. Imaginary Jessie reflects that, in truth, Jessie is relieved Gerald took the blue pills. She recalls how the pills made him incredibly thirsty, leading him to place a glass of water above the bed. Jessie attempts to slide the glass closer by tilting the wooden board, but the handcuffs prevent her from reaching it. Jessie manages to grab the glass, but her hands are still bound, making it impossible to drink. Imaginary Jessie advises her to place the glass somewhere she can access it later. As Jessie watches in horror, the dog continues to eat more of Gerald's body, prompting her to scream in distress. Imaginary Jessie then reminds her of the new slip she bought, the tag of which still rests atop the bed. Jessie carefully rolls the tag into a makeshift straw and uses it to drink from the glass. Afterward, she passes out from exhaustion. When she regains consciousness, someone enters the house, causing the dog to flee. She finds a strange man in the room. Desperately, she tells him she needs help, but the man silently shows her a bag of bones and trinkets. In disbelief, Jessie insists he is not real. Imaginary Gerald, however, refers to the man as the Moonlight Man. Gerald tells Jessie that perhaps this is what death looks like. Imaginary Gerald, now addressing her as Mouse, triggers the same memory again. Her father used to call her that. When she was 12, the family had gone to a location to watch the total solar eclipse. She remembers the tension between her parents, their argument filling the air. Jessie, feeling frightened, doesn't want to go out on the boat, terrified of the water. Her mother insists on taking her out on the boat, but her father, sensing Jessie's reluctance, offers to stay behind with her. The rest of the family leaves, and Jessie is left alone with her dad. He recalls when she was a little girl, sitting on his lap as they watched the stars together. He asks her to sit on his lap again, for old time's sake. Hesitant but compliant, Jessie agrees and sits on his lap. He begins to touch himself while she watches the eclipse, sitting on his lap. Jessie wakes up to find that her hands have been hanging all night, cutting off her blood circulation. Additionally, she suffers from leg cramps. Imaginary Gerald reminds her that she never told him about the eclipse incident. She responds that she never told anyone and that it didn't matter to their marriage. Imaginary Jessie reveals that Jessie married an older man, a lawyer like her father, who objectified her. She acknowledges that she married an image of her father. Imaginary Jessie also reveals that Gerald had been cheating on her, spending late nights, taking mysterious calls, and going on weekend trips. Despite knowing that Gerald had lost interest in her, Jessie chose to ignore it. Jessie reflects on how she handled the situation, but imaginary Jessie makes her face the reality of her past. Jessie insists that her father never touched her, only himself. She attempts to shift blame, mentioning her mother and the short dress she wore. However, imaginary Jessie points out that it was not about the dress but what happened in the bedroom. Imaginary Gerald presses her further, prompting Jessie to reluctantly admit that nothing happened. Imaginary Gerald dismisses them as inconsequential, suggesting that they were nothing more than a bad dream. Despite this, Jessie has kept the secret for years. As she processes these memories, she notices bloody footprints in the corner of the room, reinforcing her growing belief that the man she saw earlier was real, not just a figment of her imagination. This realization triggers another childhood memory. Jessie stands in the room, changing her dress into a top and jeans. Her father enters and asks if she's okay, offering an apology. He suggests that they should tell her mother, but then hesitates, expressing concern that revealing the truth might make things worse. He subtly implies that her mother could blame her. Jessie insists that they shouldn't tell her. Jessie firmly tells her father that she will not tell anyone about the incident. She wakes to find the dog licking her foot and pushes it away. The dog returns and attempts to bite her, but she kicks it away. Imaginary Gerald comments on the dog's behavior, stating that it will try again, attracted by fresher meat. Exhausted, Jessie drifts back to sleep, and dreams of standing beneath a red solar eclipse. In her dream, Jessie sees her younger self, bound by handcuffs. She apologizes to the younger version of herself, but young Jessie insists she doesn't need an apology, she needs her to remember. Older Jessie acknowledges that she remembers everything, including how her mother witnessed it all but chose to ignore it. Young Jessie urges her to remember what happened after the eclipse. Jessie recalls the dinner after the eclipse, where she unknowingly broke a glass in her hand. Her father tended to the wound, bandaging her hand. This memory sparks an idea in her. She takes the glass of water, breaks it deliberately, and uses a shard from the broken glass to slit her wrist, utilizing the blood as lubrication to free herself from the handcuffs. After freeing one hand, Jessie shifts the bed slightly and reaches for her phone, only to discover it's out of charge. She shifts the bed again, grabs the key, and unlocks her other hand. Using a sanitary pad, she wraps it around her slit wrist. Exhausted, she passes out on the floor. When she regains consciousness, she sees the dog gnawing at another piece of flesh from Gerald's corpse. The Moonlight Man appears once more. Jessie hands the Moonlight Man her wedding ring before taking the car and leaving the house. Along the way, she loses consciousness and crashes into a tree. When she wakes up, she sees rescuers approaching. Some time later, after she recovers, Jessie writes a letter to her 12-year-old self. She tells everyone she doesn't remember anything, and they believe her. Jessie confesses that she still sees the Moonlight Man every time she closes her eyes, and that the police never recovered her wedding ring. She reflects on how the shackles from her father represented silence, while those from Gerald symbolized comfort. Using the insurance money from Gerald's death, she founded a charity for boys and girls like her, sharing her story to help others who have experienced similar trauma. 6 months later, Jessie comes across a newspaper article. It reports that, 2 years prior, there had been incidents of someone breaking into crypts and mausoleums, stealing jewelry from the bodies of the deceased. Over time, the perpetrator escalated, mutilating the bodies, after having intercourse with them. The article notes that the individual only targeted male victims, something Jessie reflects on as incredibly fortunate for her. Jessie only recognized the killer when his image made the front page. The article reveals that the person suffers from acromegaly, a condition that causes progressive enlargement of the hands, feet, and face, along with an abnormally bulging forehead and enlarged arms. In a dream, Jessie gives the letter to her younger self, telling her that the killer is set to be arraigned the next day. She plans to attend the hearing, reflecting on how those meant to protect us from monsters often turn out to be the real monsters. Jessie reflects that she needs to see the sun again, as it has been absent for far too long. In the courtroom, she locks eyes with the killer, seeing remnants of both her father and Gerald in him. She quietly mutters, "You're so much smaller than I remember." The movie concludes with Jessie walking out of the courtroom, putting on her shades, and leaving with a quiet, yet confident smile. Like and subscribe the channel for more videos like these.